Hello, I'm Robert, and fact-checking one of these false beliefs is really quite extraordinary. I don't know how people got it originally, but the belief that the IPCC reports talk about collapse of civilization, and there's nothing in it of anything even remotely resembling that. The closest, I think it must be a misunderstanding of what they mean by transformative change. When they talk about how we need a transformative change, they're talking about spiritual, material and economic growth, not collapse. They're talking about then, if it is done properly, we get an increased good quality of life in all of the things that we value. They say that this is possible and this is what we can do. And yet so many people seem to think it is about basically a Great Depression. They seem to think we need negative growth. And that's not what they say at all. They're talking about positive economic growth. But the growth needs to be, we need to use growth that actually improves the good quality of life that we all want. And it is not about stopping consumerism. That's another of these big mistakes. People think it's about stopping consumerism or it's ending capitalism, and that is not in any of the reports. It's simply never said. Instead, it's about intelligent choices. And it talks about the power as consumers to direct where industry goes. We need intelligent choices in how we use energy, land, cities and industry. The energy we use, how our diet impacts on land use, our choice of transport to travel around our city, and our choice about consumers, about what we buy and how goods are manufactured. And that's what they're talking about as a transformative change. And the most thorough study of this transformative change is the IPBES report in 2019. And I never saw this talked about at all in the media reports. If you remember this one at all, you probably remember headlines saying we're going to lose 1 million species. That was this report. And it was actually about how we save 1 million species, but their main point was about transformative change, and that's been central to all of them. Transformative and positive changes. We know what will happen if we continue as we do before. Then we get more extinctions and problems of biodiversity degradation and extreme climate events and so on. And what they looked at is that we have options to shift the direction. And up until this IPBES report, then people have been saying economic growth inevitably leads to environmental degradation and social inequity. Now, the IPCC report in 2018 was perhaps changing a bit, but the IPBES report really put the strong focus on, and since then it's been taken up by the other reports. The IPCC report on the land in 2019 also a similar message, that we need to change the story, and it's not true that economic growth inevitably leads to environmental degradation or social inequity. We need economic growth to be the means, not the end, and we need quality of life to be the end we're looking for. And it's not about a new political or economic or social system either. It's about embracing diversity and finding local solutions. It doesn't matter what your political system, whether you're conservative, liberal, or whether you're capitalist or communist, whether you live in an indigenous community in the middle of the tropical rainforest, then it's the same solution for all of you. It's not the same solution. It's a case of finding your local solutions and embracing that diversity of all the different ways we have of living on our planet, and all the different religious views and spiritual views. So then, to give an idea of what this transformative change means, then this is from 1900, and you can see all the horse-drawn carriages, and try and look for the car. And you may just spot a car there. It's very, very hard to spot. Now we go to 2013. And it's a case of spotting the horses. 2 horses there in the carriage. Again, quite hard to spot. These are both photographs of Fifth Avenue in New York. That's a transformative change, and that's what they're talking about. And civilization didn't collapse because suddenly, within 13 years, everyone was driving around in cars. And in my lifetime, I've seen many transformative changes like that. When I was at school, then we used slide rules. We didn't have pocket calculators there. The pride and joy of in terms of calculating, of our maths department, was a clockwork calculator that you wound around. You put things into it, very complicated, you wound it around and it multiplied 2 numbers together. That's when I was a teenager. And then if you went in the shops and you bought something in the shops, then they would add up £1, 3 shillings and 2 pennies, and they added to say £2, 11 shillings and 9 pennies, and then they'd add up the 9 and the numbers, all the pennies together with this very complicated systems where 12 pennies mean a shilling and 20 shillings mean a pound. And they'd do that in the shop on paper. And as a school, you learnt to add up pounds, shillings and pence on paper in order to get quite a difficult thing to do. But it's very important. If you wanted to be a shopkeeper, you need to learn how to do that. You add up a whole column of pounds, shillings and pence numbers, and you get these people writing these things down in the shops if they need to if you need to buy lots of things. And if it was a small number, they could do it in their head. So, and nobody had pocket calculators. Indeed, there were only a few. If you had a really big university, high-tech university, or a big research department, they would have one computer, one big computer to serve the entire thing. It filled an entire room. The people who used that computers never got to see it. Only a few people ever got into the kind of folies of where the computer itself was. The technicians who kept it running. And kept it running is the right word, because these things kept failing. You know, they weren't necessarily operating all the time. And if you had a program and you wanted to get an answer from it, you would take this was in 1972, long after I was a school child. You know, but just in between school child and going to university, then the computer that I worked with then, you left your program overnight, and then you got the answer in the morning. And it's you just left a pile of punched cards, which you handed over to the operator, and they put it into the computer, and then next morning you got the printout. And so I've seen changes like that to now in my lifetime. So of course we can have a transformative change. And so these things, people say, oh, we're never going to be able to transform, so we're using renewables everywhere. Never going to be able to. They say we're never going to be able to have have a world where we rely on renewables for our electricity. We've got to use fossil fuels. But I mean, when I was a child, we didn't even have calculators. Now look at us. So It doesn't make sense. And what the IPBES said, so they are the innovative thing about IPBES is, and it's the only big report of this sort, that they brought together about a third of them were sociologists, 8% were interdisciplinary, 32% I think were sociologists. And they looked, social scientists, looking at the science of how people make decisions, how we actually make things actually happen in the real world, in the real life. IPCC is a scientific advisory body. They don't get into how the governments would implement what they do. They just talk about the science. They say, if you made a decision, if you did this, then this would happen. But they don't talk about the very messy things about community decisions and how we get these things to actually happen. And IPBES did, in very great detail. They talk about the politics and the sociology of how we can achieve this transformative change, and they say we can definitely do it. And they looking at the sociology, looking at it very, very carefully. Well, I'm not sure if you can see it like that now. Now you can see it. This is if you've got global. Let's see. Maybe I can. Yeah, I can move it. Just a second, I'll move it over. Right. So these are the. This is the global sustainable development path, where both policymakers and the public both prioritise sustainable production and consumption, technological change and environmental protection and fighting climate change. And this is basically the path we're on. We are on that path. We're working together as the world as a whole. Okay, we have many disagreements and things, but on the whole, we are on the global sustainable development path. And if we continue this path, as we are doing, and do it well, then we achieve improvements in absolutely everything. All the things that we value. Double plus, triple plus, if we do it really well. Whereas if we use this economic optimism, is where you just do the decisions based on the economy, and you only solve environmental problems if it's necessary for the economy. That's the only. You're not interested in quality of life. You're not interested in anything except making money. And you have the optimism that if you do that, then that'll make things better. And that gives just a few pluses here and there. You can see, especially in the non-material and in the material. There's lots of things you do: food security, water security, energy security, inequity, and so on. There are all sorts of problems with the economic optimism. You have to reform markets, and they're somewhat better, where you've got pluses all the way through on that. But the very best are the global sustainable development. Regional competition is really quite a poor thing. The sustainable markets is where you've got it's like the economic optimism with some regulation of the quality of goods and to correct inequities in the world. So they found that actually that path had quite a few pluses. But the global sustainable development, where you're really working together, and then the regional sustainability, which has lots of pluses as well, is where we're not working together globally, but we are working. There are lots of environmentally aware citizens finding local and regional solutions. So some countries might be quite good at working on sustainability and renewables and things like preserving biodiversity, but we're not very good at it globally. In this path, like the Paris Agreement probably falls apart and so on. So that's the. We're just not managing to do a collective job of things. So we definitely are. The Paris Agreement has definitely happened. It got properly sorted out since then, and we've got a few niggly things still to sort out for COP26. just credits for forests, but we've got movement of those too before COP26 even starts. Then we've got significant movement on some of the sticking points of the few remaining, not that few, but the remaining bits and pieces still to be sorted out about how the Paris Agreement works. And we're not waiting for every I to be dotted and every T to be crossed. We're well on the way with doing the things that we've pledged to do. And there's no doubt the countries are going to do that no matter what. No matter what they do in COP26, we're still going to do there's no way that we're going to suddenly say, COP26 has failed, so the United Kingdom isn't going to head for zero emissions. So that's definitely happening. So what else? I just got to cough. Talking quite a bit. So many people think so many people worry that they can't have children and so on. That's just so sad, because that's not what it's about at all. So it's very important to actually share all the positive things, to actually so there's a paper published in 2017 which claimed that the most effective climate action you can do is to have one less child. This is absolute nonsense. I mean, take for example Finland. They aim to have zero emissions by 2035. So that means that any children in Finland, if they succeed in that, will be zero emissions by then, by 2035. And this calculation they used to say that you need to have one less child doesn't work if the child is zero emissions, or even negative emissions. It wasn't a very sensible way of calculating it. People accuse it of double counting, and our children are the solution for where we go next, for achieving the zero emission future. We need our engineers, we need our innovators, we need our politicians and our activists. So yes, we do need our children, we do need the next generation, and we don't really need to think in terms of population control. What we need to think about is prosperity and material improvement and reducing child mortality. And when you do that, then automatically the number of kids that people have on average falls. And we've seen that all the way around the world in all different political systems. And for instance, Japanese and South Korea has, I think they only have about average one child per family, or around about that, it's not much more. And because they're so prosperous, and when you have a very prosperous society, we found in, of course, many societies around the world that the fertility goes way down. Indeed, they have to try to encourage them to have more children, because that's what happens. Just a natural thing that humans do. Whether extraterrestrials would all do that, I don't know. But we that's a situation for humans. So don't feel that you need to have fewer children. That's just not true. Or feel bad about having them. It's good to have them. They help you to bring the next generation, and then they may be technologists, they may be artists, they may be gardeners, or who knows what they are. But we need our future children for the world that we're going to. And there's so many of these positive stories who tell these stories, and there's a positive story about climate change. And how many of you, I don't think many journalists ran this story. They discovered that the way that they've been calculating how dry places get was a kind of something not really properly calculated. Like for instance, previously they calculated in Mexico, all of Mexico would get drier. turned out that quite a bit of Mexico will actually get wetter with climate change. And that's because the way they worked out the aridity, there's just a way of working out the aridity of the soil. A new method which measured whether plants are actually gaining or losing water, rather than a previous definition which worked out whether the air just above the land is gaining or losing water, ignoring the plants. But what matters in terms of aridity and whether the land gets drier or wetter is the plants, and whether the plants are taking up water or whether they're losing water. And this new way of calculating, which has been an oversight before, people hadn't really thought like that before, they discovered that many places are actually getting wetter, that will be getting wetter with climate change rather than drier. So how many of you have heard of this climate change story? It ran a little while ago, and it barely a ripple. And now, of course, the experts, when they do these calculations, they use these new methods, but nobody, it never actually reached the news very much. I think I can't remember where I saw that. So right, now this is a thing that is very much misunderstood, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time on it. So you get people saying, another of these doomist stories that you get in the sensationalist, and not in the mainstream media even, they say that we all have to become vegan, and the world is basically doomed if we don't all become vegan. And then they say, but that's obviously a hopeless situation, how can we all become vegan? And so you get away just feeling really depressed when you read that article. Say, that's what the scientists are saying we've all become vegan, it's never going to happen. And that is the scientists very carefully, and when I watched the IPBES, the Climate Change in the Land report, and you got the journalists trying to goad the scientists into saying that they're vegan, and they aren't. And they were very clearly saying, no, we are not. I'm not vegan, or I'm not saying people have to be vegan. Even then, the journalists didn't really take that in. They just tried to get these people to say extreme things, and they very carefully don't. And yet, the journalists still put these extreme things in their media stories. It's so badly reported. This whole topic area is hugely misreported. Never seen anything like it. Entire topic area. And so what we need to bear in mind, and so I go and look down this diagram down here, which makes it clear what they're really talking about. So we do use a huge amount of land area for meat. And basically, if you look at it's the entire Americas, both North and South America. And if you look at all the land that is used to produce meat in the world, it's roughly equivalent to both Americas. So it is indeed, and that's the amount we use for agricultural land, about equal to China, for just growing crops. So it's certainly true. If we were to, for instance, and if we were to use half the amount of meat, and we did it carefully, we reduced the amount of meat by half, then we'd save all the land in North America, basically. Almost all the land in North America would be saved, and we could use that for other methods, not for keeping meat, not for producing meat. But the IPBES and the IPCC are saying we don't need to do that. We just don't need to release that much land from agriculture. If we were to reduce the amount of land we need for meat by a fifth, then that would hugely reduce the pressure on the tropical rainforests and other ecosystems around the world. So that's what they're saying. They're not saying we've got to become vegan. I mean, if we became vegan, then we'd free a land equal to both Americas to use for anything. But that's not what they're saying. We don't need that. So this is hugely misreported. And it doesn't even need to be even. So the one way of doing it is with one meatless day a week. So if you eat meat every day of your week, then if you want to do this, and you don't need to do it instantly. We're not saying we've all got to do this instantly. We're talking about transitioning to this by 2050, or before that is better. But it's just gradually moving towards a fifth less meat. And so one way to do it is just to have one meatless day a week. And then if that is too much for you, then just try a snack, a vegetarian snack of some sort. And one vegetarian meal a day a week. Then you've done your bit. You've done a bit towards this. Just just one meal a week, or even a breakfast or supper or lunch. Just whichever is the easiest, or just a snack, one snack a week, or something. And anything that anyone does is a plus. I mean, even that's a fifth. But I mean, if you think about it, even if we were to, if you take, say, one meal a week, and you've got 7 times 3 is 21, I mean, a 20th of the land area of both Americas is still quite a lot of land that we could free, even if everyone just did that. So, and they say ideally, well, 20%, 15%, these sort of figures would make a really big difference into the pressure on the land. But it's not just stopping eating meat. There are many other things we can do. You can eliminate meat waste. So there's a fifth of the meat that we grow, that we produce, is actually wasted on people's plate or whatever. So again, that's a fifth of that land area is actually grown, is used for raising animals that are then killed and eaten, and then killed and then never eaten, except it's obviously it's bits of each one. But a fifth of those, like if you go and look at a field full of sheep, you've got 10 sheep, and basically 2 of those sheep are not going to be eaten. They're just going to be killed and not eaten, because the meat is wasted. Except it's a bit of each one instead of 2 out of the 10. So we can make a huge difference by reducing the amount of meat that is wasted, and some of that at least happens on the consumer's plate, on your plate at home. So if you can reduce the meat that you waste at home or in your fridge, or just keep it too long and it goes off or whatever, then you're doing your bit towards saving, helping with climate change and helping with biodiversity loss. And then there's another thing you can do, and this is from the, I'll maximize this, hopefully I can see it. Yes, so one of the things you can do is just change the kind of meat you eat. Now, it's important to be aware, if you're working on changing the meat you eat, and indeed if you're reducing meat, then it's important to be aware of what kind of meat you are actually, where your meat comes from. For instance, where I live in Scotland, then if it's mutton, if it's sheep, then it comes from hill sheep, probably. So that's not the same as meat from ruminant meat from cows that are fed soybeans from the Amazon rainforest. It's hugely different. And I mean, if you're a reindeer herder in Lapland, it would be absolutely ridiculous to order rice from China. So you need to be a little bit aware of what your situation is, what your circumstance is, where the meat actually comes from. But if you replace, for your average person, you have just the ordinary meat, the meat that's mainly fed grain and so on, then if you replace 75% of the ruminant meat and dairy replaced by other meat, that's the climate carnivore. And if all of us did, if meat eating was replaced by that, then it would save 3 gigatons a year. That's quite a lot of carbon dioxide. if everyone went vegan, it would save 8 gigatons a year just from the meal, just from the food. So, of course, if you like enjoy a vegan diet, or if it's something you can do reasonably easily, do be careful that you have the right balance of vitamins and so on. Don't go short on vitamin B12. There's vegetarian diet, there's flexitarian, and then there's the somewhere there's Mediterranean diet, which is moderate meat and rich in vegetables. And actually, climate carnivores actually saves more gigatons in the Mediterranean diet if you are careful how you select the meat, and you're very careful about meat that is climate friendly. That's from the Climate Change the Land report from the IPCC. And some people can't eat meat, can't go completely vegetarian, or at least it's very difficult for them. The Tibetans are like that. It's quite common. Tibetans, and a bit like the Inuit, they would probably find it difficult too, because for many generations they have eaten a lot of meat. People living in very cold places often need a lot more meat. It's more warming somehow, and it's just that they're by living in those places, and sometimes it's the only thing you've got there. You can't grow crops in the very coldest places. So indigenous peoples from places where there's very little crops being grown and meat eating, and also where it's very cold, where if you're very cold then meat somehow helps you to warm more, then they may actually be, the biology of their body has actually changed, so that Tibetans are also another way in which Tibetans are different is that they can make do with much less oxygen, which is why you have these Sherpas going up, Nepalese, they go up to the top of Mount Everest, and they can manage with much less oxygen than most people can. And so they're physiologically changed through having lived for a long time indigenously in these places. So Dalai Lama would be able to cope with much less oxygen than most people, almost certainly. And so but he tried to move to a diet of vegetables, milk and eggs, and he got very sick. And his doctors advised him that he had to eat some meat. And so he eats meat once or twice a week. So you have to be aware of your own health. Don't try and go vegan or vegetarian if it makes you ill. That's not good for anyone. So some people do actually get ill. I mean, Dalai Lama is an example if they try to eat just vegetables. Whereas other people, it's absolutely fine and they have no problems with it. So that's a very badly misreported thing. That's not at all what they're saying. They're just saying you need to reduce that, and not even you need to reduce climate carnivores, and not that everyone has to do it. It doesn't need to be enforced. And in the United Kingdom, it's like nudging. And for instance, there's the idea that school children, when the school meals, that we should have one vegetarian meat school meal a week, and that if we do that, then that reduces the meat for the kids when they're at school, that they just have one day when they have a vegetarian meal. That's actually good for your health. It's better for the health of the kids if they have one vegetarian meal a week. It gives you a more rounded, better diet. And then it's possible that they come to like it. And then as adults, they might just decide, well, I'd like to have an occasional vegetarian meal. And if so, then that's just going to happen even without making choices. And then some people, of course, will just stay with eating meat, and they won't bother to be a climate carnivore. They just don't care. They just don't think about it, or they don't care, not interested. But it doesn't matter because it's expected to happen. It's entirely feasible. The United Kingdom is expecting to reduce the meat consumption by 20%. and to do it by snudging of one meat-free meal a week at schools, and people just choosing and educating people, and then choosing people, and people are already choosing, and some have become vegan, some vegetarian, some eat a little bit less meat, some are just intelligent meat eaters, and some if you're just reducing the meat waste. Remember that we waste 20% of the meat, and that's the same amount as the 20% that you try to save by by having one vegetarian meal a week. So then there's the food waste, and then there's perverse subsidies. So we actually have subsidies that subsidize agriculture that harms biodiversity. And we also have fossil fuel subsidies, of course. And removing those subsidies, and especially shifting them, and rewarding good actors. So IPBES found that most companies are actually good actors. Most companies are not cutting down rainforests and are not damaging the environment in significant ways. They're not actually harming biodiversity. So we just get this idea from nowhere, really, that any commerce is bound, if you're making money, then you're going to be destroying the environment. That is not true at all. And most companies nowadays do actually have concerns about this. Their shareholders care. The CEOs may well care about that their company is green and is good for the climate. They care about the world their children are going to grow up, and their generation of children are going to grow up. We care about other things, not just about the amount of money you earn. And that's true of people generally. So there's many things you can do. So I have this long article here where I talk about some of the many things we can do. I focused on meat eating. That's just one of many things you can do to help with climate change. I focused on that mainly because it's a big misunderstanding that many people have. I want to help clear it up, and it's very important. Another thing you can do are, for instance, energy efficient devices in your home. And I mean, like in the United Kingdom, we all use LED lights, and you've got to buy efficient appliances. And in the United Kingdom, we are requiring new homes to be more and more efficient as time goes on. And so, yeah, that's it. I basically, that's what I want to explain. So this is the transformative change. It's very similar to what happened in just 13 years in the turn of the beginning of the 20th century. Changed from that to that, and that's basically what it's talking about. And civilization did not collapse when we changed from nearly everyone travelling in a horse-drawn carriage to nearly everyone travelling in a gasoline-powered automobile. And it's not going to collapse when we change a little bit further so that everyone is driving around in an electric car, and we are using renewables for our electricity, and we are a bit more intelligent in about how the food we eat, and we have more energy efficient light bulbs and energy efficient homes, better insulated windows. The United Kingdom is using less and less electricity every year. We will have a jump up again when we have electric cars, of course. But then that will be an increase of electricity, reduction in gasoline. So, but you don't have to. That's another myth. The idea that if you have economic growth, you've got to have constantly increasing energy consumption. That's not true. The United Kingdom has reducing carbon dioxide emissions, reducing energy consumption, and increasing GDP, increasing very healthy, increasing GDP with quite fast reducing energy consumption and fast reducing CO2 emissions. In Europe as a whole, then energy consumption is more or less steady, it's not going down, but the United Kingdom shows that if we are very careful about energy consumption, we are more careful than other countries, I think. For some reason, that's one thing we do well. Then we can actually reduce energy consumption. Certainly don't need to increase exponentially. So so these are things that we can all do. And so just try to, whenever people say civilization is going to collapse, then there's absolutely nothing like that. When they say billions of people are going to die, that's not true as well. The billions will die thing is a misunderstanding of migration. So, and actually adaptation. So we have the choice to either adapt and stay in the same place, or to migrate. And we have migration all the time anyway. People are always moving from one place to another. And when the IPCC talks about migration, they don't mean suddenly you can't live in that place anymore, so you've all got to move. It's not refugees. It's talking about how in one place, then you may have got 1 million people there, and it gets increasing, but then there's another part of that same country where there's higher rainfall and better agriculture, so you get more people moving there. And so a lot of the migration, when you talk about migration in the IPCC report, then do bear in mind it doesn't mean everyone moves. It gives an estimate of, and then there was another estimate from another, I forget which organisation, but it was 44 million people expected to could move by 2051. I've got I'll do a separate video on that. I've got an article about it. But anyway, as the climate gets warmer, then actually we get more moisture in the air, we get more rain, we get more precipitation and more rainfall or snow overall than in a cooler world. So the world is actually wetter as it warms up. But the wetness, rather unfortunately, in a warmer world, is not so spread out. So you get droughts in the summer, you get big floods in winter and things like that. There's more tendency to be like that. So an awful lot of what we have to do is trapping the water in winter for the summer, for instance, and careful dry irrigation in the dry seasons. And trapping doesn't mean trapping in dams. It can mean getting it into underwater reservoirs, slowing down rivers, putting things in the rivers to slow them down so the water spreads out onto the floodplains on either side, digging pits of necessary, and sometimes even pipes going down into subsurface reservoirs if the surface water doesn't get there, and pumping surface water into the subsurface reservoirs. All these things can make a big difference as we get to a warmer, wetter, but more varied climate. And some areas of the world do get drought and do get drier, but other areas get wetter. For instance, the Amazon gets a bit drier, but the tropical rainforests in Africa get wetter. North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, they get wetter, a little bit wetter. The Sahara Desert, obviously it doesn't suddenly get pouring with rain, but the oases get just a little bit more moisture and a little bit more rainfall in a warmer world. And sub-Saharan Africa gets significantly wetter. And China gets wetter. India gets a little bit wetter. And India is making big progress because of it gets lots more water coming down from the Himalayas because the glaciers start to melt, especially the first half of the century. And so it's really quite varied what happens around the world. And then the Himalayas, the western Himalayas, the glaciers they are actually growing and continue to grow. I think in all scenarios, the higher Himalayan glaciers continue to grow, but the eastern glaciers and the lower glaciers are melting, and those are the ones that bring more water to India. But the problem is it comes in floods, and India has to trap it and make sure it goes to the right place. So that's also as part of the transformative change and reversing certification, and we've got many projects around the world where deserts are already being turned into fertile land, and the salt water greenhouse. I've talked about all that in previous videos. I expect you've heard me talk about some of these things before, but anyway, so there was also the transformative change, and it's to do with the governments working together with local communities finding local solutions, not often innovations that they find. The farmer knows his own field much better than someone in government 100 miles away, and the scientists need to work with the local farmers who know every little square. Some of them will know every little square metre of their land if it's a smallish farm, and but anyway they know their farm very well, and they know the peculiarities and eccentricities of the land that they're farming, and so they have an understanding and a wisdom there, and IPBES say it's very important to bring that together and not make it just one way, that the scientists are out there telling the local smallholders what to do. It's got to go both ways, and they often know things that the scientists don't know, and this is a talk about working out a solution together, about how to solve their problems. So that again is part of the transformative change, is empowering local communities. That's what IPBES talk about as a transformative change. One of the transformations. Again, it's not collapse of civilization, it's about people talking to each other more, and giving a very important part of it. Not many people know that 40% of the land area of the earth is managed by indigenous people and local communities. And indigenous people, and no, I've got the right, no, not 40%, let's get the right figure. Give me a second, I'll see if I can find that figure. %25 of the land surface they're responsible for more than a quarter of the entire land surface of the earth, managing it or with tenure rights. And that's indigenous peoples, still responsible for more than a quarter of the entire land surface of the earth. So that's quite a surprising, I was quite surprised by that. And it includes 40% of all the land that is currently protected or ecologically intact in the world is amongst the land that is being managed by indigenous peoples. So this shows how important it is to get the indigenous people involved in protecting biodiversity, far more important than most people realise, to get the indigenous people involved and making their decisions about how to use their land. And that would include things like mining and so on as well, and help them to understand, like if a mining company comes and says, I could go and do a mine on your land, then for them to be involved in decision making and to make sure that the impact is less of the mining on their lands. So, and anyways, they say it's very important to empower the local communities and the indigenous peoples for making decisions and and to help them to manage their land. They often have wisdom from living there for generations, and they are very important. They are involved as well. So that was a very big part of the transformative change, is to get indigenous people involved. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Let's put it like that. Spot the Sourcestone car. That's the transformative change reminder. That's what it's all about. Okay, so I'll upload this, and hopefully this will be interesting to some of you. Interested in any questions, and if I make any mistakes, do say in the comments to the video, or just let me know. And also just a shout out for our Doomsday Debunk group, where we help people who are scared of many things. In this case, people scared of collapse of civilization. Indeed, I got the idea of this. I'm doing this article because we did a poll in the group, and we got people to ask, what are the things that you're most scared of, either before they joined the group, or people they're helping, or they still are scared of. And collapse of civilization was right at the top. That's one of the things that so many people are terrified of, that civilization is going to collapse, based on nothing, just based on clickbait, doom scrolling, doom selling journalists that have misunderstood the IPCC report. There's absolutely nothing in it about collapse of civilization. And there was David Attenborough, and one of his programs, he talked about collapse of, he used a very vague word, he didn't say collapse of civilization, he said collapse of societies. But if you watch the video, then what he meant, if you watch the film, and it became clear that what he meant by collapse of societies wasn't what most of us think. It was about things like a village that has to move because of coastal erosion. Then, in that sense, yes, we do get small communities. Some may have to just actually completely move, and even larger communities, depending on how much adaptation they do. We can protect cities from sea level rise with the sea wall. But if you've got a small village of 100 people, say, then it may not be economically sensible to the coast goes back. It goes back 15 times the sea level rise. So at 1 meter, no, is it 150? Oh no, what is the number? Oh dear, I shouldn't talk about these things that I haven't got in front of me there, because I'd have to go a long way to check. I'm just wondering if it's 50 meters seems rather small, but 150 meters seems rather a lot. So I'm not sure what the number is. But there's a certain distance that the coast goes back if the sea level goes up. I think it might be 150 for each meter that you go up. And so half a meter would be 75 meters. Anyway, so just a small sea level rise, it's very easy to protect a city with a sea wall. But if you're talking about a village that is very close to the sea, then the cliffs erode and it goes back, and we've seen, and in some places erosion is happening anyway, even without climate change. Then parts of the coastline are eroding anyway. Always some parts are eroding and some parts are growing. And then in addition to that, we have more erosion because of climate change. And sometimes it's cliffs collapsing, and sometimes it's just flat land that is going back and back, like a beach that goes back and back. But that is not what most people think of as collapse of civilization. That a village of 100 people had to abandon their village because of the rising seas. That sort of thing does happen, but that is not collapse of civilization, and it is in a way a collapse of a local society, because there were 100 people living there and then they had to move to another place, and maybe to many different places. That will happen. That is happening already. That has always happened throughout human history, even without climate change. So yes, we do get that sort of thing happening, and of course, I mean, you get governments change, and some people think, oh, because I've got a different government, because Biden's there, that it's collapsed because they think Trump was the best president. So, for instance, I mean, in that sense, you get things that for some people seem as a collapse, and then if Biden's replaced by another Republican, and probably a lot of Democrats will think that society's collapsed, but that's not a collapse of society either. Obviously, that's not a collapse of civilization, really. And we've got the reducing influence of America in the world, and it's going to be replaced by places like Brazil, India, China, of course, Russia, not Russia. EU isn't much of an influence in Greece either. But yeah, a bit Russia, a bit China, India, and Africa is likely to become quite a powerhouse as we get towards the end of the 21st century. It's got the biggest increase in population. It's got a huge potential for improvement in its agriculture. It's got very low efficiency agriculture, and I can see a future where Africa, somewhere like Nigeria, South Africa maybe, but maybe Nigeria, maybe other places in Africa, become the new United States, where they have the best technology in the world and the best agriculture and everything. Although it's not likely we have a superpower like the United States in the far future, a single superpower for the entire world. At the moment it looks like that we are heading towards a future where there are multiple superpowers. Every continent has its superpower. Probably Brazil may well become a superpower in the future, like the United States, and Mexico, and India is often suggested as being one, but is heading that way anyway, and as well as China, of course, and in Africa, some people think that perhaps Nigeria may become one of the future superpowers, though that's projecting rather further ahead, because at the moment it doesn't look like much. It's the most populated country in Africa. That's why they look at Nigeria, and it is very rapidly increasing in population. It is also industrializing. It's at earlier stages, but I could see a future where Nigeria would be the new superpower, like the United States is now. Not quite, but maybe like the EU is now. Then could be, or like United Kingdom is for sure, but much more than that. It could well be by the end of the 21st century. So again, some people say, "Oh, that's collapse of civilization." I'm from the United Kingdom, and we saw the end of the empire. And not me, of course, but my grandmother was basically born in Victorian England, so she saw the end of the British Empire. And we used to visit her in a house when I was a child, and she had relics from the empire around her house. It's really that was what she was brought up in, books and things, and so when the British Empire ended, it wasn't the end of civilization, and that was an example of a very gentle transition as far as the United Kingdom was concerned. And of course there were big upheavals in places like India, and some quite awful things happened during the end of the British Empire. But again, it wasn't collapse of civilization even there. Nowhere was it collapse of civilization. It was a transition to a new civilization, of continuing civilization everywhere. Nowhere, none of the countries in the British Empire saw collapse of civilization in the sense of no longer have technology, no longer know how to read and write, no longer able to, forgotten how to do agriculture or something. And so in the future we may well get other quite difficult transitions sometimes if as we get different countries, superpowers, extending their influence and other ones losing their influence, and countries changing their governments, and sometimes, like in the Congo, where there isn't really a government at the moment, there will be some countries that sometimes have no government, but none of that is collapse of civilization. And this is not in any of the reports, and I think we've got to a point where it's almost impossible to have a genuine collapse of civilization because it's so distributed and so robust. Things like the internet and the electricity grid and the many different ways that we have of supplying things, and all the alternatives we have for everything, and the huge food surpluses that we have now at the end of every year, the rapidly improving agriculture, the population that is levelling off. If our population was still growing exponentially, maybe, but it's not, it's levelling off and it's getting steady. The possibilities of finding that we're now going to be having space mining likely second half of this century and so on, and so I don't see, I think we are, it's better, another way of looking at it is that we have become ineradicable. That was one of the anthropologists that I read, rather amusing way of putting it, that far from being worried about human beings becoming extinct, that it's more that human beings have become ineradicable as a result of we've become so resilient, so distributed, so much things like tin food and so on, that we are far better to think of humans as ineradicable than as risking our civilization collapsing. I think there's still going to be humans, or our descendants, whatever we evolve into, 10 million years from now, maybe a billion years from now, there'll still be whatever we evolve into. I think we're still going to be here. I don't think we're going to go away anytime soon. That's my personal belief, and based on well-founded rational belief, not just wishful thinking. Anyway, so I will now stop this and upload it, and hopefully there's some things here to think about. You need to maybe get some new ideas, and do go and read, listen to the climate scientists themselves, listen to the IPBES. I've got links there, I'll put the link in the video description, and go and read up on some of these things, and then just remember, it's not collapse of civilization, it's transformative change. That's the only thing, that's what the IPCC reports are about. There's nothing in it of that, nothing about billions of people dying, nothing. It talks about migration, it doesn't talk about lots of people dying, large numbers of people dying. And even on the worst case, even if we do the worst possible scenario from the economic optimism, it's still not talking about collapse of civilization, it's still not talking about billions of people dying. That's just not there at all, not in any of the reports, even in their worst scenarios. They don't talk about that. So goodness knows the junk scientists who talk about that, and then the people who've never read the reports, or not read them properly, who claim that that's what the reports are about, but it's not what the proper scientists say. So anyway, that's it. I'll upload this now and